I'm Alan Jenkins. I'm Executive Director of the Opportunity Agenda in New York City. Our mission is really expanding opportunity for everyone in our country. And so making sure that we have a criminal justice system that keeps everyone safe, that provides equal justice, and that's really based in evidence and not stereotypes is absolutely crucial. And that we're not locking people up, taking people out of the American mainstream unnecessarily or unjustly. That's crucial to opportunity. Conversely, we've seen over the last 20 years that incarceration in particular is an opportunity-ending event because of the collateral consequences, because of the devastating nature of people being taken away from their families and their communities. It runs counter to expanding opportunity. And so we need to make sure that that is always a last resort in our criminal justice system. And so we have a lot of work to do. One of the most exciting things we're seeing right now is that there's rising public support for transformative positive reform to our criminal justice system. Support for alternatives to incarceration, support for policing that's rooted in evidence and public safety and not stereotypes or racial profiling. There's rising public support for welcoming people back from prison and incorporating them into our economic engine, into our social fabric. And that public support cuts across ideology and partisanship in a way that you rarely see in American public life. That's a remarkable opportunity for everyone who is working towards a more just and effective criminal justice system. It means that we need to tell the right story. We need to talk about solutions and alternatives because we see that most Americans know that something's wrong, but they don't actually know what the other possibilities are. It means that we need to connect it to the values that we hold, the idea that our criminal justice system should keep everyone safe, treat everyone with equal dignity and justice, that it should be rooted in evidence. We need to keep saying that over and over again so that people can keep their eyes on the prize of where are we trying to head. And then we need to push for those remedies that are both the small incremental changes, but also the big transformative changes. This is a moment where Americans are ready for big transformative change in our systems. As long as it's positive, it fits with their values, and it actually gets things done. There are a lot of lessons to be learned from some of the other successful social justice movements and social change movements in the United States. And that includes the civil rights movement of half a century ago, but also the LGBT equality movement that's going on right now. One of those lessons is that we need to lead with our shared values, that the facts are crucial, that things like savings and expense and the like are very important to the moment we're finding ourselves in the criminal justice reform conversation. But we also have to remind people of why this matters and that the values that we share. That's one important aspect. I think this is an interesting thing to think about when it comes to arts and popular culture. There's always been an important cultural element to every successful movement. We think about, Martin Luther King and Malcolm X couldn't have been successful without, Marvin Gaye and Mahalia Jackson. That cultural piece, or Sidney Poitier and Harry Belafonte for that matter, that cultural piece has always been important. We think about the modern LGBTQ equality movement and the importance of American Family and Will and Grace and Glee and the like to transforming the way people think about the American family and who's a part of our society. We're going to need to make sure that we have our eye on the cultural ways in which the story of criminal justice, people who are emerging from prison, accused of crimes and the like, what role that plays. And similarly, the news media matter. So, we've analyzed news reporting on criminal justice reform, and the news reporting on reform is pretty good. But if you watch the local news, it's an unrelenting stream of terrible crimes that you would never know that crime is at historic lows in our society. Many of us who work both in the justice system, and I worked in the Department of Justice in the mid-90s, and who were looking at concerns about equal treatment within the justice system, and I previously served at the NAACP Legal Defense Fund, and that was one of my concerns. We saw that the crime bill had a lot of troubling elements and that they were reflective of that moment. In other words, the things like mandatory minimums that you saw in the crime bill, you were also seeing adopted at the state level and in cities. And it was clear that they were, number one, not tied to evidence of what would keep us safe, They were not looking at the trends where in some cities crime was already starting to drop without the intervention of these draconian measures. And we also saw that they weren't employing best practices. So they were jumping straight to punishment without really thinking about what is going to keep us safe, ensure equal treatment, actually move people who've run afoul of the law back into society in a way that's productive, rooted in common sense and prevention and evidence and the notion of equal justice. I think almost any of us who look closely at that legislation knew that it wasn't upholding those values and that things were likely to go wrong, and 20 years later we can all see that they did. If Congress were looking at this today, and I hope they do, I would say what we need in 2014, 2015 is not a new crime bill, but a new opportunity bill. We need legislation that looks at what our society needs to ensure that everyone can achieve their full potential, that ensures that we're all safe, that all communities are safe, that when the justice system is engaged in problem solving, that it's doing so in an even-handed basis based on evidence and not on stereotypes or on fear, but also that we're investing in prevention, in addressing the root causes of things that can lead to crime. One of the things we see in our research at the Opportunity Agenda, the vast majority of Americans favor investing, greater investment in addressing the root causes of crime over locking more and more people up. And they're right about that. So I'd like to see legislation that is really about that, about ensuring that everyone has greater and more equal opportunity. There's no question that both evidence, research, common sense show that that would result in much less crime as well as much less injustice in the way our systems work. We're seeing now a raft of really encouraging legislation. I think in some ways the most interesting is the legislation that's being introduced by Senators Booker and Paul. So really coming from very different perspectives, but sharing the belief that we need to invest in prevention, in avoiding mass incarceration, and really in investing in what's going to keep us safe and ensure equal treatment. That's phenomenal, but it's not alone. You see in states like Texas, for example, some very innovative new approaches both to crime and to justice that I think are much more rooted in what we need. And we see that in a lot of different places. So I'm very encouraged, and particularly this issue, I think we see more bipartisan support and agreement, at least on the goals, if not necessarily the entry point, than we see on almost any other issue that's before Congress or state legislatures right now. And that's extremely encouraging. I think the most striking thing to me is that this is an extraordinary moment. There's public support for more transformative change in our system than we have seen in generations. So this is not really a moment to tinker around the edges. This is a moment to really rethink the kind of system of justice we should have, the kind of system that will keep us safe and ensure equal treatment and fairness for everyone. This is a time for big change. It needs to be smart. It needs to be rooted in evidence and what works, common sense. It needs to be explained to the American people so that we understand why we're doing the things that we're doing. And it needs to be smart, both in terms of the use of our resources and in terms of how we implement them. But I think within those parameters, everything could be different. We could be looking back 20 years from now on this year or the next as the pivotal moments where we got our criminal justice system right. In terms of size, but much more importantly in terms of values and outcomes.